The moment he approached the counter, the energy shifted, subtle at first, like a ripple under glass. A smirk, a delayed glance. Then came the sighs, the suspicious questions, the whisper to security. All for a man who looked calm, professional, and black. What should have taken 5 minutes unraveled into 5 relentless days of scrutiny, humiliation, and whispered collusion. Each visit carved deeper into his dignity. But while they mocked his presence and doubted his worth, they never asked the one question that mattered. Who is he really? They thought they were dealing with just another customer. They never imagined he held the power to dismantle everything they believed they controlled. If you're drawn to stories of justice rising from silence, like this video, subscribe for the next chapter, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from, and what part made you stop and think? Alden Ramsey stepped into Ashbridge First National Bank at 4:47 p.m. on a heavy Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the air felt thick and restless. He was sharply dressed, slate gray slacks, a pressed white shirt, and a muted blue tie. No flashy watch, no loud cologne, just quiet professionalism. His appearance should have spoken volumes, but inside the polished bank, his presence barely registered. The interior was a gleaming combination of glass and brushed steel. 2 tellers worked behind the counter. One, a young man who barely looked old enough to vote, and the other, Miranda Larchmont, late 30s, blonde, immaculate, with a professional smile reserved only for certain clients. Alden stepped forward and stood in front of her station. Miranda glanced at him from the corner of her eye, but didn't move. She tapped at her headset and looked away. Alden cleared his throat politely. "Excuse me," he said, offering a warm smile. "I'd like to make a withdrawal." She pretended to be listening to something in her earpiece, nodding vaguely to no one. After a long pause, she swiveled in her chair and waved forward the white man standing behind Alden. "Next," she called, completely bypassing him. The man hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but Miranda didn't wait. "Come on up. I'm on a tight schedule." Alden remained quiet, stepping slightly to the side. He didn't protest. The customer glanced at him awkwardly, then shuffled forward. As the transaction at Miranda's station wrapped up, Alden tried again. He stepped up and placed his withdrawal slip and ID on the counter. "I'd like to make a withdrawal, please." Miranda slowly turned, picked up the slip, and squinted at it like it was scribbled in a foreign language. She held up the ID and looked at Alden as if trying to determine if it was real. 12,000, she said, raising her brows. "You sure that's not a typo?" "No, ma'am," Alden replied calmly. "It's correct." Miranda tilted her head, then chuckled under her breath. "You don't look like someone who pulls that kind of money out of an account. Where's this coming from?" "It's a personal account. I've made similar withdrawals before." "Well," she said, examining his license again, "we have stricter protocols now. Too much fraud going around. I'm going to need a second form of ID." Alden reached into his wallet and pulled out a corporate credit card with his name embossed on it. She took it, but didn't glance at it right away. Instead, she looked at him. "Alden Ramsey? You don't look like an Alden. Not sure what I expected, but not that." She finally scanned the card with the scanner, then looked back at the screen. Her face tightened. "This amount triggers an internal review. I'll need manager approval." "That's new," Alden said. "It wasn't required before." "Well, it is now," she replied sharply. "Security measures change all the time." She tapped the keyboard, then sighed dramatically. "Wait here." She picked up both forms of ID and walked into the back without another word. Alden stood at the counter, his calm posture beginning to fray under the weight of stares from others in the bank. A couple seated near the glass office door whispered. A mother with a child looked over her shoulder more than once. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Miranda returned, alone. "Manager's in a meeting," she said, not quite looking at him. "You'll need to come back tomorrow, or you can use the ATM if it's urgent." "I'd prefer to complete it now," Alden replied. "The funds are needed today. Then I suggest calling ahead next time. We don't handle unusual withdrawals this late in the day without clearance." "Is there a note on my account?" "Nope," she said too quickly. "But that doesn't mean much." "So you're denying the transaction?" he asked. Miranda tapped the keyboard again and nodded. Correct. For now. Bank policy. She saw him coming. She didn't blink. Back again, she said, tone flat but laced with the same passive resistance that had simmered beneath her performance the day before. Yes, Alden said calmly, placing his withdrawal slip, ID, and card on the counter. I'm here for the same transaction I attempted yesterday. Miranda picked up his paperwork like it had been dragged through a swamp. She turned the slip upside down, then right side up again, inspecting it with an exaggerated squint. $12,000, she said, as if reading from a courtroom transcript. What a number. She leaned slightly forward, closer to the counter, as if trying to inspect Alden himself. You do know that's quite a bit to ask for from a teller window, right? Yes, Alden replied, already bracing himself. I've done it before. Here. Really? She asked with a flick of her eyebrows. Well, I don't usually do this for people like you. The words slipped out effortlessly, and her lips didn't even flinch. Alden's face didn't move. He simply stared back, unmoved. Miranda continued as if it was nothing. Most of our clients, our usual clients, schedule appointments for this sort of thing. She emphasized the word usual like it was a code everyone else in the room understood. She swiped his ID slowly, then paused dramatically. Oh boy, she said loudly, pretending concern. Still flagged from yesterday. Notes about unusual behavior. She turned toward her coworker and added, with a voice just loud enough to carry across the room, might want to keep an eye on this. He's probably here to launder money or scam us. Alden didn't flinch. Around them, patrons shifted. A woman by the potted ficus turned her phone toward the exchange. Another man, seated with a briefcase on his lap, raised his eyebrows. Miranda made a show of flipping the card over, staring at it, then tossing it back toward Alden like it carried something contagious. You said Ridgeway Holdings, right? She asked. What exactly do you do there? Investment management, he said. Sure, she replied. And I'm the Queen of England. She began typing again, letting the tension hang. Her fingers hovered over the keys before she spoke again. Just so we're clear, I'm not accusing you of anything, she said, voice syrupy. But this much cash with this kind of attitude? It doesn't sit right. I haven't shown attitude, Alden replied carefully. I've followed all the steps you've given. Exactly, she said, turning the monitor slightly toward her without letting him see the screen. That's the trick, right? Be polite enough and no one asks questions. She smiled without warmth. Well, I'm asking. She pushed back from the keyboard and reached for the phone at her desk. Security, she said sweetly. Can we have someone monitor station 4? Just a precaution. Alden looked down, his breath shallow but controlled. He knew the pattern, the accusation without proof, the narrative written before the story began. Miranda looked up again and leaned across the counter, speaking low, but not quite quiet enough. It's funny, you know. You people always act like following the rules means something. But it doesn't. Not if we don't believe you. She straightened her posture and looked around the lobby, then back at her screen. And right now I don't. The security guard, a young man named Caleb, approached cautiously. He stood a few feet away, not intervening, just present. Everything all right, Miss Larchmont? Oh yes, she said with mock cheer. Just making sure everything's in order. We've got a large cash request here, and I don't want to get caught with egg on my face. Caleb glanced at Alden. Sir. I'm fine, Alden replied. His voice was steady, but the heat building behind his collar was undeniable. Caleb nodded and stepped back. Miranda turned again. The third visit, however, carried a different weight. He didn't come to challenge Miranda Larchmont. He came because he had no other choice. Dressed in the same clean, crisp suit from earlier in the week, Alden stepped through the doors and headed directly toward Miranda Station. She saw him before he spoke. Her eyes widened, then narrowed with theatrical disbelief. Back again, she said flatly. You really are committed to this performance, huh? I'm here to complete my withdrawal, Alden replied evenly. He placed the paperwork down. Same amount, same account. Everything is in order. Oh, it's not about order, Miranda said, not even glancing at the form. It's about perception. She stood, stretched her shoulders as though physically preparing herself for inconvenience, and pressed a button under her desk. A soft beep sounded. Alden glanced around. No one else noticed. "Have a seat in a special area," she said, gesturing toward a corner of the lobby. A space clearly marked assistant's lounge, with 2 gray, sagging chairs and a worn-out coffee table. "That's usually where we send people when things aren't adding up." "Excuse me," Alden said, his brow furrowed. "It's standard protocol," Miranda chirped, her tone dripping with practiced sweetness. "You've had 2 transaction issues, your account's still flagged, and you've yet to provide income verification. Until we sort this out with management, we'd appreciate it if you didn't crowd the counter." Alden hesitated, glancing around. There were 5 other customers in the room. All eyes began drifting toward him. "If there's a problem with my paperwork, I'd prefer to address it here," he said, not moving. No, Miranda said, walking out from behind the counter. She held a small plastic sign in her hand and marched toward his position. With exaggerated flair, she placed the sign on her own window ledge. "Transaction halted, manager approval required." The words were printed in bold red, casting a quiet judgment over Alden like a scarlet letter. She stepped back behind the glass and crossed her arms. "Now it's official," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Everyone knows this window is out of service until our friend here gets things straightened out." Alden felt the heat crawling up his spine. He wasn't just being delayed anymore, he was being displayed. "I'll wait right here," he said, his voice composed but strained. "If your manager is available, I'd be happy to speak with him directly." "Oh, you'll wait all right," Miranda snapped. "But over there, we don't do confrontations at the counter. It's uncomfortable for other customers." She pointed again toward the special seating area with a tone that left no room for debate. "Don't make this harder than it already is." Alden, after a long pause, picked up his ID and paperwork and walked to the corner. The walk felt longer than it should have. Every step carried weight. His polished shoes thudded against the tile louder than he remembered, like a slow drumbeat of surrender. He sat in the faded chair, eyes forward, hands folded, while behind the counter Miranda exchanged glances with her fellow tellers. One of them laughed quietly. The manager, apparently in a meeting again, remained absent. 15 minutes passed. 20. Customers came and went. Each time someone glanced toward the gray corner, Alden knew exactly what they saw. A man waiting, shamed, segregated. Miranda carried on, smiling at the next guest. "How are you today, sir? Just making a deposit? Perfect." Her charm was effortless when she wanted it to be. Occasionally, her eyes flicked toward Alden to make sure he was still seated, still obedient. She seemed to enjoy it. 30 minutes in, a customer approached the counter next to Miranda's. "Why is that guy sitting over there?" she asked. "He in trouble?" Miranda lowered her voice just enough to seem confidential, but not enough to be private. "We've had some irregular activity with his account," she said. "Bank has to be careful these days. You'd be surprised how easy it is to fool the system." The customer nodded, and Miranda continued serving her. Alden heard every word, not because he had super hearing, but because Miranda intended for him to hear. This wasn't caution, this was performance. Another 10 minutes passed. A man in a gray suit walked in and began approaching the teller window before stopping abruptly to glance toward Alden. His eyebrows raised subtly before he turned to Miranda. "Is the manager available?" he asked. "Need approval for a wire transfer." Miranda turned, her tone suddenly sugar-coated. "I'll check right away, Mr. Weston." It contrasted violently with the coiled tension in his gut. He headed directly to Miranda Larchmont Station, where she was already watching him, her chin tilted slightly in a smirk she didn't bother to hide. Well, she said, drawing the phrase out like she was greeting a stubborn child. Back for another round, Alden placed the same paperwork, the same ID, and the same debit card on the counter without saying a word. Miranda picked them up with a performative sigh, as though handling something unpleasant. She held his ID to the light again, as if it might magically reveal something criminal this time. $12,000, she repeated. "Third day in a row. You don't quit, do you?" "It's my money," Alden said quietly. "I need it for a medical emergency." "Oh, now it's a medical emergency," she said, turning to face him directly, raising her voice just slightly. "Mind telling me what for? Because a 3-day withdrawal attempt for that kind of cash is not exactly typical. Sounds suspicious." Alden stiffened. Around them, people turned. A man filling out a deposit slip paused mid-sentence. A mother with a toddler on her hip glanced up from her phone. Miranda leaned forward over the counter, eyes sharp. "Why don't you explain it? Right now. Let's all be on the same page." "It's for my father," Alden replied, jaw clenched. "He's having surgery. I need to transfer payment directly to the care provider." "What kind of surgery?" she asked, still loud enough to draw more attention. "Cardiac," Alden said, voice low. "It's urgent." "Cardiac," she repeated. She said it like it was fiction. "And they take cash? That's a little odd, don't you think?" Alden didn't answer. Miranda raised her eyebrows and turned slightly, addressing the teller beside her. "Does your dentist take stacks of cash, Jen?" Jen looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Miranda turned back to Alden and added, "Or maybe it's not a real provider. Maybe this is all part of some scheme. You'd be surprised what people try to pull when they think we're not paying attention." Her voice rose on that last word, paying, emphasizing her assumed vigilance like it was a badge of honor. Alden stood his ground, but his hands had formed fists at his sides. "I've followed every instruction you've given," he said. "There's no policy that prohibits my withdrawal." "That's funny," she said with a laugh that wasn't funny at all. "You say that every day, but here we are again. Third time's a charm." She made a show of dragging the withdrawal slip back across the counter and holding it up like it was contraband. "Let's say you're telling the truth," she said. "Let's just pretend. You still haven't explained why this needs to be withdrawn in person. Why not do a wire transfer or a certified check?" "Because the provider requested cash," Alden said, enunciating each word carefully. "I've already explained that." "Oh, right," she said. "Because that sounds totally normal. Medical facilities love handling untraceable cash." A few customers chuckled awkwardly. The laughter wasn't at a joke, it was social discomfort given shape. Miranda smiled at their reaction. She was winning, and she knew it. Still keeping that poker face, she said to Alden. "You know, most people would have gotten flustered by now. Afraid I didn't scare you." "I'm not here to argue," he replied. "I'm here for my withdrawal." "Maybe you should be scared," she said, almost as a whisper, but her eyes gleamed with power. "I've flagged your account 3 days in a row. You know what that means, right? A full audit, frozen funds, investigations. People lose jobs over less." "You're abusing your position," Alden said, still calm, but now visibly angry. "You're targeting me without justification." "Targeting?" she asked, playing mock innocent. "Oh no, Mr. Ramsey. I'm protecting the bank. From fraud, from risk, from people who walk in demanding thousands in cash without anything to prove they're legitimate." She picked up the red manager approval required sign again and plopped it down in front of him like a verdict. "And once again, you're going to have to wait." Every now and then, someone glanced in his direction. Some looked curious, some concerned, and a few, like the middle-aged white man standing in line 2 places behind where Alden had stood earlier, looked disgusted. "They always try to pull this trick," the man muttered to the woman beside him, loud enough to be heard across the tiled floor. "Act all proper, dress it up like business, but it's always the same hustle underneath." Miranda didn't miss a beat. She turned slightly and nodded at the man, keeping her voice casual yet clear. "Exactly," she said, as though they were merely discussing the weather. "That's why we have protocols. We're protecting everyone here." Her tone was calm, even proud, like she was some kind of gatekeeper, warding off invisible threats. Alden heard every word. He stayed seated, eyes fixed on the polished floor. He knew if he looked up, if he so much as raised an eyebrow, he'd give her what she wanted, a reason to escalate. But Miranda didn't need provocation. She was already pushing forward. Picking up her desk phone, she pressed a button and spoke with artificial concern. "Caleb, could you come up to the front?" Her voice was smooth, gentle, rehearsed. We have a situation with an uncooperative guest. He's becoming increasingly agitated and might pose a threat." Alden didn't move. He hadn't spoken since she dismissed him. His hands were resting on his knees, and his breathing was steady. But Miranda's lie had already taken shape, and within moments, Caleb, the security guard, was walking toward him. Caleb had interacted with Alden each day this week. He had never seen Alden raise his voice, never seen him act out. Still, duty called. "Mr. Ramsey," Caleb said, his voice lowered. "We're going to need you to step outside for a moment, just until we get clarity from management." Alden looked up. His expression was blank, as if trying to register what was happening through a pane of soundproof glass. "I haven't done anything," he said quietly. "I've followed every direction I've been given." Caleb looked uncomfortable. "I know, sir, but you reported that you're uncooperative, and we can't ignore it. Can we just talk outside?" Alden didn't argue. He stood slowly, shoulders stiff with the tension of suppressed rage, and allowed himself to be led to the glass front doors. As they exited, more heads turned. No one knew the full story, but Miranda had given them the outline. Man flagged for suspicious activity, refuses instructions, needs to be escorted. That was all most needed to feel validated in their judgment. Outside, the summer heat hit Alden like a slap. Caleb turned to face him. "Sir," he said, trying to keep his tone respectful, "I'm not accusing you of anything. But you've been flagged multiple times, and her report says you raised your voice." "I haven't," Alden said flatly. "Not once. I've been silent. You've seen that." Caleb nodded. "Yeah, I have. But she's the senior teller. If she claims there was a disturbance, we have to treat it as real. That's the protocol." "So her word is enough to override what's in front of your eyes?" Alden asked. Caleb looked away. "I'm just doing my job." "So is she right?" Alden said bitterly. "Harass someone long enough until they finally snap, then say you were just enforcing policy." Back inside, Miranda was continuing her day like nothing had happened. She reset her terminal, removed the red sign from her counter, and took the next customer with a grin. "Sorry about the delay," she said cheerfully. "Some folks don't understand boundaries." The older man from earlier stepped forward, smiling faintly. "You handled it well," he said. "Professional." "Thank you," Miranda replied. "We try to keep things safe and orderly around here." She lowered her voice again. "You never know who might walk through that door. Some of them don't like being told no." Outside, Caleb's radio crackled, and a message came through from the branch manager's assistant. The manager was unavailable until the afternoon. "I'm going to have to ask you to come back another time, Mr. Ramsey," Caleb said. "Maybe when the manager's here, we can get this sorted out properly." "You want me to leave?" Alden asked. "After 3 days of this? After being lied about and labeled a threat?" Caleb didn't answer directly. When he stepped inside this time, even the customers who didn't know him seemed to sense something different. Conversations quieted as his shoes tapped across the pristine tile floor. Miranda Larchmont was at her post, sipping from a white ceramic mug with a lipstick ring on the edge, chatting idly with a coworker. She noticed him the second he entered but didn't acknowledge him. She finished her sip, placed the mug down, and greeted him with a smile so falsely sweet it stung. "Well," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "look who's back. I wasn't sure we'd be seeing you again after yesterday's excitement." Alden said nothing. He approached the counter with composed dignity, offering his withdrawal slip and ID once more. "This is the 5th day," he said quietly. "I've fulfilled every requirement you've laid out, and I've tolerated every delay. I'm not leaving without my money." Miranda clicked her tongue and pulled the slip toward her with 2 fingers like it was something dirty. "5th time's the charm, right?" she said, chuckling to herself. "Let's see what we've got." She tapped at her keyboard with exaggerated slowness, then glanced up. "Oh dear," she said. Still flagged. Suspicious patterns noted. Notes from security. She looked him over, head tilted. "Now, let me just confirm something." She stood from her stool and walked toward the back office. Alden didn't move. He stood exactly where he was, expression neutral, hands folded in front of him. He didn't look around. He didn't respond to the quiet whispers growing behind him. After a few minutes, the office door opened and out stepped the branch manager, a tall man with thinning brown hair and a rigid posture. His name tag read C. Herndon. He approached the teller counter with Miranda beside him and addressed Alden in a rehearsed tone. "Mr. Ramsey," he said, "I understand there's been a delay in processing your request. I've reviewed the teller notes and spoken with my staff." "I've been here 4 times," Alden said calmly. "Every visit has involved your teller changing the rules, suggesting fraudulent behavior, calling security, and yesterday, falsely labeling me a threat." Mr. Herndon raised his hands in a calming gesture. "I hear you, but Miranda was following our safety protocols. Large cash transactions, especially repeated ones, often trigger internal flags. She's just doing her job. Her job is to serve customers, not humiliate them," Alden replied. "I've presented ID documentation, explained my purpose," which she documented. Herndon interrupted, cutting off Alden's momentum. "It's all in the system. We do take patterns seriously, and the behavior she observed warranted caution." Miranda stood a few feet away, arms folded, head held high like she had just been vindicated. "You see," she said, "it's not personal. It's policy." Herndon turned to her. "You can proceed with the next step." Miranda nodded and walked back to her station. Alden's eyes followed her movements, his posture rigid with disbelief. She picked up his withdrawal slip, looked it over dramatically, then, without warning, tore it in half. The ripping sound sliced through the lobby. "What are you doing?" Alden asked, voice still calm but edged with fire. "We're freezing the account," Miranda said, each word deliberate. "Until further notice. Too many discrepancies. Too many warnings in the file." "What discrepancies?" Alden asked. "What warnings? You created those notes. You made those calls. You manufactured those issues. And now," she said, smirking, "they've become record." Mr. Herndon interjected. "This is temporary, Mr. Ramsey. As soon as corporate clears the account, you'll regain access." "How long will that take?" "Could be a few days. Could be a week," Herndon replied. "We don't control that timeline." Alden's heart sank. He had stayed silent. He had followed every humiliating instruction. And now, despite doing everything right, he was being locked out of his own funds. "This is theft," he said. "This is institutional theft." "No, sir," Herndon replied, voice steady. "This is prevention." "From what?" Alden asked. "From a man quietly withdrawing money for his father's surgery?" His fingers moved steadily, not a tremor between them. As he unlocked it, scrolled to a saved contact marked simply RD Priority, and press call. The line rang once. "Yes," came the voice on the other end. Alden didn't hesitate. "Proceed," he said, then hung up. There was no follow-up, no elaboration. The ball had begun to roll, and the rules of engagement had shifted entirely. Inside the bank, the routine continued uninterrupted for approximately 7 minutes. Miranda laughed with a regular, joked about interest rates, and praised a woman for her savings plan like nothing had occurred. The staff operated in lockstep, unaware that a firestorm was about to descend. At the 8th minute, the front desk phone rang with an urgency that immediately changed the temperature of the room. The receptionist answered. "Ashbridge First National, this is Tanya," she said cheerfully, then froze mid-sentence. Her eyes widened. "Yes, sir. Right away." She pressed the hold button with trembling fingers and stood up. "Mr. Herndon," she called toward the glass office at the back of the room. "You need to take this call. Now. It's the regional director. He says it's urgent." Herndon, who had just sat down with his morning tea, rose quickly, confused but concerned. He stepped out, walked swiftly to the front, and picked up the receiver. Charles Herndon speaking. The voice that came through the line was measured but sharp. "Mr. Herndon, I am Regional Director Glenn Matheson. I want to know why my Executive Financial Officer was denied access to his own funds this morning. I want to know why he was publicly humiliated, why your teller has placed fraudulent notes in his account, and why your security escorted him from the premises under false pretenses." Herndon's mouth went dry. I wasn't aware." "You weren't aware?" Matheson cut in. He's visited your branch for 5 consecutive days. He documented every interaction. His calls to customer service were recorded. And this morning, he was forced to stand there while your teller tore up his withdrawal slip and falsely froze his account without legitimate basis. You weren't aware. Herndon stammered. I spoke with the teller, Miranda. She assured me he was flagged in the system. Flagged because she created the flags, Matheson snapped. She authored those notes. She called security. She slandered a man who signs her paycheck. That man is a senior officer at Ridgeway Holdings, one of this bank's most profitable institutional clients. You just endangered our relationship with them, and quite possibly your own employment. Herndon felt the sweat pooling under his collar. What would you like me to do, sir? I'm sending a compliance team. They'll be there within the hour, Matheson said. In the meantime, I want Miranda Larchmont removed from the floor. Immediately. I want the account reinstated with a formal apology, and I want you to personally issue a public acknowledgement in writing that this branch failed to meet professional standards. Herndon's throat worked, but no words came out. Is that clear? Yes. Yes, absolutely. Herndon set the receiver down like it was radioactive. His face had gone pale. He turned toward the teller row, his eyes fixed on Miranda, who was just handing a receipt to a smiling customer. She looked up at him, then smiled politely, unaware of the collapse unfolding behind her. Herndon walked directly to her station. Miranda, he said, voice tight, come with me. Now. She blinked. What's wrong? Now. He didn't wait for a reply. He turned on his heel and strode to the office, not looking back. Miranda exchanged nervous glances with her colleagues before following. Inside the glass-walled room, Herndon shut the door, lowered the blinds, and turned to face her. That man you humiliated for 5 days, he said. He's not just a customer. He's a senior executive. He's one of Ridgeway's top officers. Wait, what? Miranda said, laughing nervously. You mean that guy? He called his regional director. Herndon interrupted. And now we are in full crisis response mode. Compliance is coming. Your conduct is under investigation, and I've been instructed to remove you from client interaction until further notice. I was doing my job, she said quickly. I followed protocol. I flagged unusual behavior. You created those flags. Herndon snapped. You falsified reports. You antagonized a man who did nothing wrong because you decided he didn't look the part. You mocked him. Publicly. This isn't about policy anymore. This is about bias, misconduct, and reckless damage to this bank's reputation. This time, no one turned away or pretended not to see. Every set of eyes, customers, tellers, even the security guard, snapped toward him as he crossed the polished floor with measured grace. No one said a word. At the far end of the lobby, Charles Herndon emerged from his office, his previously composed demeanor now replaced with a haunted tension. The call from Regional Director Glenn Matheson had scorched through his morning like a wildfire. The compliance team was en route. Miranda was in her own tailspin. And now the man who had been systematically dismissed was standing before him with the calm authority of someone no longer playing along. Mr. Ramsey, Herndon began, stepping forward quickly and extending his hand. Welcome back. I want to sincerely apologize for everything that's occurred this week. What happened here was unacceptable and not representative of our institution's values. Alden regarded the handshake for a moment before accepting it with a firm grip. It was representative of your institution's culture, he said evenly. The values just got in the way. Herndon flushed and nodded quickly. Of course. Of course. The compliance division will be here shortly to go over every interaction, every note made on your account. We'll have a full reconciliation, and your account access has been fully restored as of 10 minutes ago. Good, Alden replied. I've arranged to have the withdrawal handled by your internal transfer desk. We won't need to use a teller window. Herndon nodded again, clearly relieved. Yes, whatever you need. I'll personally oversee it. As he gestured for Alden to accompany him toward the office, Miranda Larchmont emerged from the staff room. Her eyes met Alden's for a single beat too long before flicking down to avoid his gaze. She had just been informed she was under official review for conduct violations. Her badge had been deactivated, her access to the teller system revoked, and she'd been asked to stay away from all customer-facing responsibilities. But seeing Alden again, seeing him welcomed by Herndon, walking freely, calmly, with his chin high, twisted something inside her that no policy change could reach. As Alden stepped past her, he turned slightly and offered a perfectly neutral nod. "Miss Larchmont." She blinked. "Mr. Ramsey." Her voice cracked slightly. The professionalism was gone. She stood frozen, clutching a file folder that trembled at the edges. Alden entered Herndon's office and sat opposite the manager. The blinds were half drawn, enough to provide some privacy, but not to shield the room entirely. "There's one more thing," Alden said, reaching into his leather satchel and withdrawing a slim binder. He placed it on the desk between them. The name on the cover read, "Employee Performance Review, Miranda Larchmont." Herndon stared at it. "What is this?" "My firm handles internal auditing for multiple divisions," Alden said, watching Herndon's face change color again. "As Executive Financial Officer, I'm periodically assigned to review personnel evaluations tied to financial irregularities. I was due to submit her review to Ridgway's banking partners at the end of this quarter." "You're saying," Herndon began, eyes wide, "you were assigned to review her before this week even started?" "I came in person," Alden said, "to quietly observe, to make an informed recommendation. I didn't expect to become the test." Herndon opened the file with trembling fingers. Inside were notes, detailed, professional, damning. Patterns of behavior, transactional inconsistencies, customer complaints from previous locations, a documented trail of microaggressions filtered through client surveys and recorded calls. "This is," Herndon began. "This is thorough." "It always is," Alden replied. At that moment, Miranda, unaware of what was being reviewed, knocked gently and pushed the door open. "Charles," she asked weakly, "do you need me to?" Her voice faded as she saw the folder. Her eyes dropped to the bold print of her own name. "What is that?" she asked. "My final recommendation," Alden said without looking up, "which will be shared with the regional board and Ridgway's compliance auditors." Miranda's knees seemed to weaken. I didn't know who you were." "You didn't care," Alden said, echoing Herndon's earlier words. "And now the record will reflect that." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the compliance team's arrival, heels and briefcases moving quickly through the front doors. Herndon stood and motioned for Miranda to leave the office. "You should wait outside. They'll want to speak with you first." She backed out slowly, eyes wide, and turned toward the staff hallway, her confidence gone, replaced by a visible dread. The door closed softly behind her. "Mr. Ramsey," Herndon began again, but Alden raised a hand. "We're finished." He stood, gathered his satchel, and walked to the door. The team split into 3 units, one for auditing computer activity, one for conducting employee interviews, and one reviewing security footage and customer complaints. Within the hour, the carefully preserved image of the branch began to crack under scrutiny. In an upstairs meeting room, now converted into a makeshift command center, a compliance officer named Shannon Reeds sat across from Miranda Larchmont. Her voice was calm but firm, her pen poised over a digital tablet. "Miss Larchmont, are you aware of how many customer notes you personally submitted over the past 3 months for flagged activity?" Miranda shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I just follow what I observe. If something seems off, I document it." "You documented 32 flags in 8 weeks, Reeds replied. Of those, 27 were related to Black or Hispanic clients. 17 had no follow-up or verifiable concern." "That's coincidence," Miranda stammered. "It's about behavior, not background." Reeds tapped the screen. "And yet, in multiple instances, you requested security presence for clients who had no behavioral incident, used loaded language in internal memos, agitated, defensive, entitled. And in some, you directly contradicted recorded footage." Miranda's throat went dry. "I didn't mean to. Intention is not the issue," Reeds cut in. "Impact is. Your pattern of behavior demonstrates not only bias, but a misuse of authority that has now cost this institution credibility, relationships, and potential legal exposure. Meanwhile, in a separate interview room, Herndon sat under fluorescent lights facing a senior compliance auditor, who methodically detailed the timeline of events from Alden's first visit to his latest. At no point, the auditor said, did you override the teller's authority despite repeated incidents, flagged reviews, and a client who identified himself and presented valid identification. You were informed of his executive role and still failed to act until prompted by a superior. Herndon fidgeted. She told me he was flagged for suspicious activity. I trusted my staff. You deferred accountability, the auditor said flatly. You approved the freezing of a client account based on falsified behavioral notes and stood by as a customer was publicly humiliated on multiple occasions. Do you believe that aligns with leadership standards? No, Herndon admitted, his voice small. Downstairs, Alden sat in the lobby, not out of necessity, but by choice. He remained a silent observer as justice unraveled itself through the structure that once oppressed him. Clients walked by cautiously, some offering him small nods of acknowledgement, others averting their eyes entirely. Tanya, the receptionist, approached nervously. Mr. Ramsey, she said quietly, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I saw what happened, but I didn't know what to do. No one did. Alden met her gaze. You know now, he said gently. That's what matters. Back upstairs, Miranda stood outside the manager's office, arms crossed, visibly trembling. A member of the compliance team stepped out with a printed letter in hand. Miranda Larchmont, he said formally. Effective immediately, your employment with Ashbridge First National Bank is terminated. This letter outlines the grounds, including repeated misconduct, violation of ethical standards, and creation of a hostile environment. She snatched the paper, eyes welling. I didn't think it would go this far. You didn't think you'd get caught, he replied. A few doors down, Herndon was handed a separate document. Mr. Herndon, the lead auditor said, you are being reassigned to a non-supervisory position at another branch. You will undergo mandatory training and remain under evaluation for the remainder of the fiscal year. He accepted the letter without protest. The collapse of his career had come swiftly, with no room for appeals. At noon, a formal statement was emailed and posted to the branch's website. It read, we at Ashbridge First National Bank extend our deepest apologies to Mr. Alden Ramsey for the unacceptable treatment he received at our Ashbridge branch. We acknowledge the failure in oversight and are committed to rebuilding trust through immediate corrective action. The individuals responsible have been removed, and a full internal bias retraining program is now mandatory across all regional branches. This incident will serve as a turning point in ensuring accountability, transparency, and respect at every level. The press release circulated quickly, gaining traction on social media and in local news outlets. Within hours, customers began calling the branch, some outraged, some relieved. A few even arrived in person to close their accounts in protest. In his office, Alden reviewed the apology draft forwarded by Matheson before nodding his approval. It's a start, he said simply. Let the record show how this ends. The compliance team wrapped by mid-afternoon, having logged every note, downloaded every recording, and marked the necessary steps for systemic correction. What had begun as a single act of injustice had unraveled into a full-scale investigation with lasting consequences. Miranda left the building without speaking to anyone, her belongings packed into a cardboard box, her head bowed. Herndon stayed behind to finalize his transfer paperwork, stripped of his title, authority, and illusions. 3 months had passed since the storm at Ashbridge First National Bank, but for Miranda Larchmont, the aftershocks had continued long after the compliance team packed up their files and the headlines faded from local news. Losing her job had been a devastating blow, but what followed? The realization of how deeply her actions had harmed someone, not just professionally but personally, gnawed at her in the quiet hours between job rejections and late-night self-reflection. She had spent weeks angry, defensive, lashing out at the system that had punished her, convinced that the fallout was disproportionate, that Alden Ramsey had used his position to ruin her. But that defense didn't hold up when she started looking at the facts laid bare by the investigation. The notes she'd written weren't isolated moments. They were patterns, habits she hadn't even noticed, or worse, had learned to justify. Slowly, unwillingly at first, then with growing discomfort, Miranda had begun to see what others had tried to tell her in subtler ways. Her version of professionalism had been weaponized, and the impact had been real, even if the intent had not. At the urging of a friend, she began volunteering at a community outreach center called Harbor House, a place focused on financial literacy and support services in underprivileged neighborhoods. She started by organizing forms and handing out pamphlets, staying in the background, keeping her head down. But as the weeks went on, she began to listen. To the single mother who didn't know how to open a savings account, to the elderly man who had been scammed by predatory lenders, to the young woman who couldn't get a loan because of her last name. The stories added up, and the patterns became impossible to ignore. For the first time in her life, Miranda was forced to see the system from the other side of the counter, and it was not flattering. On a bright October morning, the center hosted a speaker series featuring professionals from across the region. The final guest was Alden Ramsey. His name was printed clearly on the flyer. Equity in Finance, a Personal and Professional Reckoning. Miranda saw it posted the week before and almost didn't show up. She thought about calling in sick, about skipping that day altogether, about pretending she had moved on. But something in her, a small, persistent need to face what she'd run from, kept her rooted. She arrived early, helped set up chairs, and found a seat near the back of the modest auditorium. When Alden stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. He wasn't in a suit today. He wore a simple navy sweater, slacks, and a small lapel pin from Ridgeway Holdings. He didn't need flash. He had presence. "Good morning," he said, his voice even and warm. "Today, I want to talk about dignity, not as a concept, but as currency. Because in many places, dignity is the first thing people are forced to surrender when they walk through the doors of a bank." He paused, letting the words settle. 3 months ago, I was denied a withdrawal. Not because I lacked the credentials, not because I broke a rule, but because I didn't look the part. I endured 5 days of manufactured obstacles, condescension, and humiliation. But what struck me most was not the personal offense. It was the structural ease with which that offense was allowed to happen. Miranda sat motionless, her breath shallow. He was telling the story, their story, to a room of strangers, and he wasn't dramatizing it or seeking pity. He was educating. Bias in finance isn't always overt, Alden continued. Sometimes it's in the hesitation before a transaction. Sometimes it's in the language used to describe a customer. Sometimes it's in the assumption of fraud where there should be none. And the real danger is not just to the customer. It's to the integrity of the institution itself. The audience nodded, murmured. Some jotted notes. Miranda kept her eyes fixed on the floor, heart pounding. "We can fix systems," Alden said. "But first we have to see them. We have to acknowledge where we've failed and where we've let habit override principle." He closed his notebook and stepped away from the podium. "I thank those who stood up, and I even thank those who didn't, because they showed me exactly where the work needs to begin." The applause was quiet at first, then grew. Alden stepped down from the stage, and for a moment, Miranda stayed frozen in her seat. Then slowly she rose. She made her way through the crowd, pausing once to wipe her palms against her skirt. When she reached him, he turned, recognizing her instantly. Their eyes met, not as adversaries, not as banker and customer, but as two people standing in the aftermath of something broken. "Mr. Ramsey," she began. Her voice was smaller than she remembered it ever being. "I've spent the last few months trying to convince myself that what happened wasn't really my fault. But I was wrong. I didn't understand before. I do now." Alden looked at her for a long moment. "That's not something I expected to hear," he said. She nodded. "It's not something I expected to say, but I mean it." He gave a small nod. "Understanding is a start. Action is what comes next." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm here. To learn. To change." They stood in silence for a beat longer. Then he extended his hand, and she took it. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. But it was something honest, something forward. As she let go, Miranda felt something shift inside her, a beginning, perhaps, of a long-needed transformation. The end. If you found this story powerful or thought-provoking, consider liking and subscribing to support more narratives that shine a light on justice and human transformation. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of the twists and the redemption arc? Which moment hit hardest for you? Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Your feedback shapes every future chapter.